Hello friends, welcome to Let's Crack UPSC CSE English, and this is me, Dr. Siddharth Arora. Friends, I'm sure that you must have recalled that last video that I made. We started a new series, a complete new series, which is dealing with the summarization of the entire Lakshmikant for polity. Now we have divided the entire polity into small portions of the chapters. Sometimes the same chapter may be divided into several parts so that we are able to do justice to this summary. So the edition of Lakshmikant which we are addressing in this series is the 5th edition. Now I'm sure that you are aware that the 6th edition of Lakshmikant is already out in the market, but as we have already done in a video, there is not much difference between the 5th and the 6th edition. However, you can take your own call and you can address or you can refer to any of these editions. So in this same series, today what we are going to start, we're going to start with the first part of Lakshmikant, which deals with the historical background, or also called as the historical underpinnings, and we are going to do it so easily, so succinctly, so that you get a complete 360-degree view of the entire book. Now, the best thing that you can do alongside is you can read the book together. Reading the book will give you a different perspective, and while you are reading and you're watching the video together, I hope you are understanding you will get a far better subject control than by merely reading or by merely watching the video. One last thing before I start this part, a very important issue that comes to everyone's mind is that is Lakshmikant enough? Or if I finish off Lakshmikant for polity, have I done it and am I through this exam? First of all, please remove this myth. Yes, Lakshmikant is a very good book. Yes, Lakshmikant is actually a civil service specialty book. Hence, they write the book for civil service examination. But at maximum, it will give you 30 to 40% of prelims with regards to polity. Rest, you will have to work hard at it. But as we have said, all said and done, it is very important that you have a good foundation structure, a good foundational book. That Lakshmikant will be sufficient for all of you. So in this series, okay, we are all doing, why are we doing all these Lakshmikant series and NCERT series and MCQ series? One single point agenda that all of us at Unacademy have for all of you learners is that we want to give you a realistic chance of passing this exam. We want you to be there at Mussoorie and make your dreams into reality, become the next group of IAS and IPS officers. And that is why we are bringing many courses for you. Most of the things which we are learning across YouTube videos will give you a 360-degree view. But to get a holistic preparation, to get a detailed information, to get detailed training, that 24-karat gold preparation, you must join Unacademy subscription where we can have one-to-one classes. There are many such courses launched one after another. A course which was happening till about very recently was the ultimate crash course to crack UPSC CSE 2020. But what is the announcement for all of you? We are launching new courses. We are launching new courses within the first week of May, and I want all of you not to miss any of these classes. Hence, it is very important that all of you join these Unacademy subscription if you want to give yourself a realistic chance. And what is most interesting is Unacademy has drastically reduced the prices. So all those of my friends who are taking this exam in 2020 or for that matter 2021, please take a 12-month course. This is available at merely 40,000 rupees. Use my code SIDLIVE and you will get an immediate 10% discount and you'll get this course for 36,000 rupees. Those are my aspirant friends who are taking this exam in 2022 or even 23, please take a 24-month course which is available for merely 48,000. Use my code SIDLIVE and you will get a 10% discount, and the same shall be available to you at 43,200. Just do some mathematics. 1-year course is for 36,000, 2-year course is for 43,200, merely a difference of 7,200 for a year's course. So your wise gang of students, take a wise decision, but take your decision now. So we'll start the story. So you can open Lakshmikant, okay, and you can start reading alongside, and I'll start giving you the summary of this part. So story starts. So just let it go like a story, right? So we will refer to year 1600 as the reference year or the beginning year for the summarization. So 1600, year 1600, East India Company comes to India. So East India Company comes to India as traders. Now we'll go step by step and try and understand each of this part. So now they have come as traders, and now when they come as traders, they have come under a license. That license was called as charter. It was given by the king or the queen of England, as the case may be. Okay, so these were called as royal charters. What were these royal charters? These were the exclusive licenses given by the royalty of whatever that country be, the king or the queen, to trade in a particular place. Now, what is important for you to note, that East India Company was the only company which was given this license or the charter. That is why called as that East India Company had a monopoly of trade in India. What was that? It was a monopoly of trade in India. So this is a very important part. Now, East India Company started trading in India. Now, please don't make any mistake about it. East India Company had access to India as a market. Now, fortunately, at that time, and we should be proud of that part, at that time, the East India Company was trading in a country which had more than 1/4 of the world's GDP at its disposal. So we were called by various other things, the golden bird and so on and so forth. We were very rich at that time. Now, when a country is so rich and a company gets exclusive license, just look at this like a story, gets exclusive license to trade in that country, you must understand that logically speaking, you will notice that there was more and more money coming in East India Company coffers. But so East India Company did not only keep itself as a trading company, they bought more and more political muscle, they bought more and more military muscle, and one fine day they became so strong that they won what is popularly called as the Battle of Buxar. So this was Battle of Buxar. The year was 1764, and the then Mughal Emperor Shah Alam was reduced to a pensioner. So now East India Company is pretty strong in India, and they get what are called as Diwani rights. Say this word. The word is Diwani rights. This is what? This is civil tax revenue collection rights, okay, over three main areas, that is Bengal, Orissa and Bihar. Unbelievable. The company is becoming rich. Now it is becoming really loaded. Why? Because they are getting Diwani rights or the tax collection rights over three big areas of India, Bengal, Orissa and Bihar. This makes them even richer. Cool. Now what happens? Now we would be expecting that the company should become rich. What happened actually was that the company did not become rich. The officials of the company, they started becoming rich. What? Yes, the company did not become rich. The company's officials started becoming rich. I hope you can understand. This was primarily due to corruption. So instead, the company went into a huge debt. At that time, a £1 million debt was there with East India Company. So this was very surprising. So East India Company goes to British government and asks for help to settle off this £1 million debt. Now the British government is very surprised. First of all, why is East India Company coming into a debt, since we would be expecting that the company should be becoming rich? Why? Because it was trading in such a large and such a rich country. However, the British government was constrained to help East India Company to settle this debt, but they did not do it like this. They took something in return. This is called as quid pro quo. Quid pro quo is to give and take. So this is a Latin word for give and take. So the British government decided to help East India Company, but the British government also decided to pass laws. Why? Because they wanted to control and regulate the affairs of the East India Company in India. These series of laws were called as Regulating Acts, later called as East India Company Acts or the Charter Acts. Why were they called as Regulating Acts? Because their main aim was to control and regulate the East India Company. Number one. Why were they called East India Company Acts? Simple point. Why? Because at that time we were under East India Company rule. Hence, this was pertaining to East India Company, hence called as East India Company Act. Why were they called as Charter Acts? Because how will you control this East India Company was by revising the terms and conditions of the charter every 20 years. So the first regulating act was passed in 1773, then was 1793, then was 1813, then was 1833, and the last one was 1853. So you notice 20 years difference. Why? Because the method or the way of regulating these East India Company was by revising the terms and conditions of the charter every 20 years. So we will be now addressing some of the things with relationship to each of these acts. The first of these acts is called as Regulating Act of 1773. For the first time ever, East India Company was made answerable. How was it made answerable? Answerability was made by appointment of what is called as Court of Directors. So East India Company was told to appoint what are called as Court of Directors, who will be answerable to the British government. Number one. Number two, at that time in India, there were different zones of power. For example, there was Bombay, there was Madras, and there was Bengal, each of which was headed by a governor. Each of this governor had his own independent executive and legislative powers. In other words, these executive and legislative powers or each of the governor were decentralized. What am I saying? They were decentralized. By the Regulating Act of 1773, for the first time, all the powers which were legislative powers were started to getting concentrated into the Governor of Bengal. And the Governor of Bengal became what is called as Governor General of Bengal. He became Governor General of Bengal. So mark my words. What did I say? Gradually, you are converting a decentralized government structure into a centralized government structure. So you're converting Governor of Bengal into Governor General of Bengal. I'm sure that you know this, that the Governor General of Bengal, the first one was Warren Hastings. Now this man, the Governor General of Bengal, was assisted by a 4-membered council. This 4-membered council is called as was called as Governor General in Council. What was that called as? Governor General in Council, sometimes also referred to as Calcutta Council, sometimes also called as Council of 4, since there were 4 members. Okay. So now this is the point here, and also please remember, Regulating Act of 1773 also established the first Supreme Court in India. At that time, a very small Supreme Court with only 4 judges, with Sir Elijah Impey as the first Chief Justice. Very limited powers, but at least it started. So Regulating Act of 1773 had 3 main things. Number 1, there was answerability of East India Company. Now they were told not to do private trade. They were said that you will be, or they were told instead that they will be having Court of Directors who will be directly answerable to the British government. Now what happened because of this part is that although the British government was very happy about the Regulating Act of 1773, however, what was noticed in this, that Regulating Act of 1773 was not very successful. So I say, why? Why was it not successful? Since it was so dependent upon East India Company's cooperation, that without the cooperation of East India Company, none of these answerability, none of these things that have been advised by the British government was possible. And that is why Regulating Act of 1773 is deemed to be a failure. But then, before the next Regulating Act, which was supposed to happen in 1793, came the Prime Minister of England at that time. He was called as Pitt the Younger. Pitt the Younger passes another act, and this act is called as Pitt's India Act of 1784. He wants to tell East India Company who's the boss. Okay, so what does he do? He bifurcates the East India Company's powers into 2 powers. Number 1 are commercial decisions. The other ones are political, military and administrative decisions. So there are 2 different divisions now. Now the Pitt's India Act of 1784 says, East India Company, your court of directors will only take commercial decisions, business related decisions. Every political, military and administrative decision will be taken by what is called as the Board of Control. The Board of Control will be appointed by the British government. So now what have we done? We have established for the first time what is called as double government. Also, Pitt's India Act says for the first time, dear East India Company, all the territories, mark my words, all the territories that you are holding in India are actually not territories, are not your territories, they are British possessions in India. In other words, now the property or the territories are also directly or indirectly controlled by the British government. So the first very important change of 1773 was because of Pitt's India Act. Gradually, the centralization starts increasing. Gradually, the East India Company's powers are gradually reduced. By the Regulating Act of 1813, you will notice a considerable difference in East India Company's powers. So much so, by Regulating Act of 1813, this was a question that was asked in 2019. By the Regulating Act of 1813, the monopoly of East India Company was also removed. In other words, other companies from England could come also and trade in India. So in other words, it really drastically reduced the powers of East India Company. Now this is a very important act, which is Charter Act of 1833. So 1793, 1813, 1833. Now what happens? This is the final step of centralization. Now why would I say it is a final step? Because I hope you recall that till last time when we had done 1773, the governors of Bengal had got converted into Governor General of Bengal. What does that mean? Gradually the powers from the different provinces, the Governor of Bombay, Governor of Madras, etc., were now being pushed or were being diverted towards Governor General of Bengal. However, by the Regulating Act of 1833, what was unthinkable was done. What was that done? All the provincial legislative councils were completely abolished. In other words, all the decentralization mechanisms were all over. Now all the power was with one man. You had Governor General of India. So Governor General of Bengal was converted into a new position that was called as Governor General of India. He was completely in control of the entire country, hence called as the last and the final step of centralization of governance in India. East India Company was converted into a purely administrative body who will work in trust with the British government, and laws were necessarily to be ratified by the British Parliament. Hence, they were now called as Acts. So, 1833 marks a very important step with regards to complete dominance of the centralized governance by the British government. Then comes Act of 1853. By this time, this is supposed to be the last Charter Act. Now, I ask myself, why would this be the last Charter Act? Because of Act of 1853, the bureaucracy went out of the British or the East India Company's hands. How would that happen? In those days, if you wanted to become a higher civil servant, you would not be able to do this unless you join a college called as Haileybury's College, which is in London. Now, Haileybury's College did not have an open exam like you have now, a UPSC CSE exam. So, you wanted to join a higher civil services college, you would have to get sponsorship by the East India Company. Now, by the Act of 1853, for the first time ever, the Haileybury patronage system was over and open examination for civil service, higher civil services was introduced. For the first time, a separate legislative council was established, and therefore East India Company was no longer having any power. So in the words of British Parliament itself, they said, we don't think there is any further need of any more Charter Acts, since that is the aim of regulating acts. What was the aim of regulating acts? To control and regulate the East India Company. Hence, we have done it. British Parliament said, dear East India Company, now you can trade in India indefinitely. You merely are a trading organization. Please trade. And we will give you indefinite extension to that license to trade in India till such time as the Parliament of England so desires. And East India Company kept on working. So very important effect of this was covenanted civil services, that is the higher civil services, was open to the exam the way you are doing now. So the Haileybury's patronage system is over. Now who would believe that just 4 years later, everything will go on for some other feeling. Why? Because we had what is called as the first war of independence. I'm sure you know something about the Mangal Pandey incident, about the Enfield P53 rifle, or the entire story about Rani Jhansi and so on and so forth, and of course the doctrine of lapse of Lord Dalhousie. So all these things finally jammed into and dammed into, we call it the first war of independence, Britishers call it the mutiny. Either ways, Britishers were inches away from losing this battle and we would have become independent at that year itself. However, as destiny would be, we lost that battle. But the first war of independence, however, changed the British government forever. They had to pass what is called as Government of India Act 1858. Please pay attention to the language here. The act is Government of India Act. My friends, Britishers are announcing that now your government is not here in India, it is actually sitting in London. They for the first time made what is called as a responsible government, an answerable government. How would that be? First, number one step happened is Queen Victoria proclaimed herself to be the Empress of India. So that proclamation happened in Allahabad, which is now called Prayagraj. Second, they removed the office of Governor General and instead a direct representative of the crown, that is Viceroy, was now the head of affairs in India. Also, in the British Parliament, they appointed a cabinet minister rank officer to head what is called as the Indian Council in England. He was called as Secretary of State of India. Now, do you recall there was something called double government? That double government of body, the Board of Control and the Court of Directors, both those double government concepts were removed and both these powers were given to one man, that is the Secretary of State of India, hence making a very powerful office. Government of India Act created what is called as a responsible government, an answerable government. Please mark my words, this was the first time in India, in the history of India, that there was ever a answerable government, a responsible government. This answerability started all the way from the officers, went to the Viceroy, then to the Secretary of State of India, then to the Indian Council, and then finally to the British Parliament and the Queen Victoria. So we had a very important step, but we thought it is for our functioning. No, Britishers were doing it for their own administrative streamlining. It hardly changed anything on the grounds. Why? Because it was done for a purpose of only administrative streamlining of the British government system. What actually was intended to bring about a change in India were called as Indian Councils Act. So the first Indian Councils Act was 1861. Please remember the other one is 1892. The third one is 1909. Now the Indian Councils Act had two aims, and you can say this from the word itself. Number one, get more and more Indians involved in the government, and second, develop more and more of legislative councils, not executive councils, legislative councils. So Lord Canning, who became the first Viceroy, was instrumental in bringing about Indian Councils Act. The first one was they introduced 3 Indians as unofficial members. These Indian members for the first time sat in the legislative councils, and these were the Raja of Banaras, the Maharaja of Patiala and Sir Dinkar Rao. They had zero powers, mind you my friends, they had zero powers, but still I hope you realize it was the first time Indians were sitting since they were nominated by the Viceroy. Next was that they started what is called decentralization. You must be recalling that I just told you about a couple of minutes back that the centralized structure had become consolidated by Act of 1833. Provincial legislative councils had got abolished. By the Act of 1861, some of these powers were now starting to be returned back to the legislative councils. Hence, decentralization had started. Lord Canning had a good idea of how to run the government. So he started doing what is called as, he created transaction rules, he recognized a portfolio system, and he also introduced the concept of ordinance, which I hope you know is still prevalent in India under Article 123 of the Constitution, that is the executive passing laws when the legislative is absent. So this is the part of 1861. However, things were supposed to be far stronger and far better in times to come, because in 1885 we formed what is called as the Indian National Congress because of A.O. Hume, and under the pressure of Indian National Congress we passed what is called as the Indian Councils Act of 1892. It created a stronger legislative council with 16 members who now had some powers. They could discuss budget with the executive. This is an asked prelim question. Don't miss this part. They also said that now you will have far more number and far more powers. Why? Because it was not only by nomination by the Viceroy that the legislative councils were formed. it was also dependent upon indirect election. Although the word was not used, but still it was indirect election through universities, trade unions, and merchant unions. As I said, the word indirect election was nowhere used, but it was certainly an indirect election happening in a different way, and that is why they had more powers and more numbers. And then comes the Indian Councils Act of 1909. This was the result of Morley-Minto reforms, and Morley-Minto reforms were a result of two very major events that is happening in India. One was a very crazy decision of the partition of Bengal, okay, and the second one was the establishment of Muslim League in 1906 as a political unit. Now, Morley-Minto reforms was having just one aim: to divide and rule. They wanted to create a communal, volatile environment in India, and that is the reason that Morley-Minto reforms introduced what is called as a separate electorate system, also popularly called as a communal electorate system. Hence, Lord Minto is sometimes called as the father of the communal electorate system. So what he started in the Morley-Minto reforms actually ultimately culminated into the partition of India, and you know that part very well. But the Morley-Minto reforms, at least with regards to legislative councils, was good, since for now the legislative councils were larger in numbers, 60 members, and now you also had direct election. Now they could move motions and resolutions. In other words, they could almost, they were very close to functioning like a parliament. So the Indian Councils Act of 1861, 1892 and 1909, to a large extent, I'm not saying completely, but to a large extent, was successful in doing two things. One, it got more and more Indians involved, and second, it got more and more establishment of legislative councils. But what is the problem? The problem here is that, just do the calculation. 1600 is the story where it started. 1773, or rather 1764, was the Battle of Buxar. So 1773 was the first regulating act, and we've already reached 1909. But we are nowhere close to independence. Not even close. Not even close. We were talking, but we didn't know how to reach there. Now comes the great man, Mahatma Gandhi. In the next part of this video series, we will do how Mahatma Gandhi's entry changes everything with regards to our movement of independence. How did he actually give us what is called as the roadmap or the direction towards independence? There was changing, yes, but it was too slow for us to become independent. We will notice in the next part of the series how did Mahatma Gandhi bring about the change. Then we'll understand federation and the making of the constitution. So I hope you have understood till this time what was the entire structure. Now this is how you summarize things. These things have to be done in considerably more detail. If you want to do that, please don't hesitate. Take a decision right now. You can join these courses which are being launched very recently. Use my code SIDLIVE, SIDLIVE, and I'll be very happy to teach you in far more detail as for the requirement of civil services examination. Either ways, my friends, in the words of Unacademy, let's crack it. And until next time, God bless and thank you.